Oh,
Yeah.
right. And
Hands up if
it
you
does.
don't listen to We Have Ways.
Sorry,
Oh,
I don't listen to
Lee,
it. I can't
actually,
stand James Holland.
I heard you on it a couple of
Oh,
years
no,
ago.
that was Fat. That was my colleague, Fat Nicholas.
Yeah. But no, I think you're right that the awareness of wargaming
Mm,
as a hobby, pastime, that we're not all megalomaniacs wanting to kill
yeah,
people, etc., is
yeah,
becoming much more accepted. I mean, us as a club, we now meet at the Return Servicemen League, so we're at two of those,
yeah,
ones, and we're at the ones which are still the community halls rather than the ones that survive on gambling and poker machines, etc.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's really good because that's a nice fit. And actually, we think there's what can we do as a club
yeah,
to help them?
yeah, yeah,
Is part of what we're
yeah,
looking at. But we were previously in churches,
yeah.
and we're no longer in churches because there was that time before I came on the committee, etc., where they didn't want us anymore.
No, no. We had a situation. We were in a community. Our club meets in a community centre, and we had a. We started going there in '83. So I was a teenager, I think. So it's been a few years. Um, and it was at the time of all CND and get American missiles out
Yeah.
of this country. And the woman who ran the centre was absolutely fine. And she said, "Oh, we're doing a big open day where people who use the centre are showing what they do. So the badminton people played badminton and the cake making people made cakes and the Women's Institute made jam and sang Jerusalem, and we turned up and put on a war game, and one woman on the committee hadn't realised, and she went mental. She went absolutely mad. And whilst we're still using the centre, they will not mention us on their list of events that happen and this, that, and the other. But that does seem to be a very dated view because
40 years on,
yeah, yeah.
holds a grudge.
It's brilliant. I mean, it's great. I mean, it means we don't get people walking in off the street and demanding to join the club, which might sound terrible, but we're not really a club. What we do is it's a hothouse for game development for us. So it's like our R&D department. So if somebody turned up with 1,500 points of Warhammer or whatever, it wouldn't really fit. So it's quite good that we're under the radar in that respect. But that was a sign of the times really, but things have moved on significantly. We got contact. I live in a place called St Albans, which was a Roman city, Verulamium, and the museum have got in contact and said they'd like us to put something on at the museum, and something Roman related.
Oh, yeah.
So there's more of an appetite for it. I think the fact that Warhammer has been on the high street, the Warhammer stores, Games Workshop stores, have been on the high street now for how long? 30 years? Must
Well,
be, maybe longer. Who knows? Means that we're more on the radar. Even if they don't know exactly what we do, they do know we exist, and they do know that people play games with toy soldiers. And I think that's opened doors for us in other areas, which is positive.
yes.
But yeah, you had a show on in Melbourne today, didn't you? Mega
Yeah,
or
Mega
something?
in Kensington. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's right. That's funny actually, because it's the Kensington Town Hall, isn't it? When I was a youngster, Salute in the UK was held at the Kensington Town Hall. So it's gone full circle in that.
we had exactly
Kensington
that same
Chelsea was.
conversation
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
So,
Well, it's funny. I look on the map of Melbourne, and there's St Albans, isn't it? So it's we share a lot of the names.
oh, well, I'm originally from Perth,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
and my folks are Scottish, but they're from
yeah,
Edinburgh, not from WA.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
that's part of being down in the Antipodes and being
yeah,
affected
yeah.
by all that.
Yeah, my daughter lives in Sydney, and she was telling me how her boyfriend's gym is in King's Cross, and you think, right, all these names, I really feel at home when I come down there because all the names are the same, and the pubs look like the pubs looked here in 1980, so it's like going back to my youth. It's quite fun. I really enjoy it. But
It can be a very dangerous activity.
yeah, but
Very good. So I'll give you a quick rundown when we run these. Thanks for coming back, because getting the arrangements last time was a bit difficult, and it's been very hectic the last couple of months. So
that was my error, and I do apologise for that. So
that's quite okay. So you're our Christmas present in a way, because we're not going to get another one done this year, and we'll regroup and come back and do some more next year. Look, this is very much it's a chat. We don't talk about we don't deliberately talk about specific games or such. What we're really interested to do is understand the journey about the people who write the games or publish the games and where they've come from, because being here in Australia, the opportunity to bump into someone at a show or the pub or something and have a chat to get to know them is very rare. So thank you for coming on board. This can be a conversation that goes in often all different directions, goes off on tangents, come back on things. So far, they've actually been really quite interesting, the ones we've done with everyone else. Hopefully, they've got something out of it. We definitely have. And anything goes. But at the same time, if you say, hey, I didn't mean to say that, we don't want anyone to know, just let us know. And then Leith will do his magic reduction stuff in the background. So no one...
I keep those files for later.
Not supposed to say.
The old uncut version, eh?
That's it, mate. I released that one as a special.
So the first question we ask everyone is like, how did you get into wargaming?
Okay. Well, I never really started or stopped. The earliest toys I can ever remember having were toy soldiers. My father served in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War as a pilot. His father served in the First World War. He was wounded on the first day of Third Eep at Passchendaele, as it's popularly known, and clearly survived, or I wouldn't be talking to you. But the idea that war was something you had to protect children from really didn't enter their minds at all. I've got on my bookshelves over there, I've got a little wooden Morse code, toy Morse code, that when I was about 7, my dad started teaching me Morse code, because he was entirely convinced that I would have to fight for my country as he had done and as his father had. So the idea that, you wouldn't give your kids war toys because they were terrible just didn't really enter their heads. I was born in 63, so I'm 61 now. And really, I started playing with toy soldiers. They weren't actually the sort of Britain's red-jacketed grenadier guardsmen. They were actually sort of more modern. I remember them having an SLR, I think it was. But they were cast in... They were plastic, but partially painted, so they had pink faces, but they were mainly cast in sort of a dark green and a dark grey, so you could see who the good guys were and the bad guys were. I think that was... Hold on a moment, let me just have a word with my wife. Elizabeth, would you make me a coffee? All right. Oh, see you. Oh, she's going out with the dog. I'm clearly second best, right?
No,
Her friend's meeting her, so she's got to go now. Right, so it was really a case of playing with toy soldiers and flicking tiddlywinks at them or rolling marbles at them. And then when I got a little bit older, I don't know, 7, or I had Action Man, which was, in America they had Action Buddy, and I don't know what you guys had down there, but here we had Action Man. And he had, if you've got one of the later ones, he had realistic gripping hands and realistic hair and eyes that would, you'd have a thing at the back of his head and his eyes would go left and right. Quite what purpose that served, I don't really know. But yeah, so I started off with war toys, and you get to the point making Airfix kits and shoving them full of fireworks and throwing them off the roof and blowing them up in midair and things like that. All the things that now would get your parents in prison. I really enjoyed doing all that stuff. But then when I was 11, I went to senior school, and on the first day there, they're obviously easing us in gradually, and they said, all right, we'll show you around the library. So they said, have a look round the library and see what you think. I'd gone to a little village prep school which was tiny. It was in an old country house. It was very much like my wife loves this program on TV called Mallory Towers. It was that type of sort of jolly hockey sticks, very British type thing. Anyway, I went to this big school and it was huge. It was it seemed like a city in its own right. The library was bigger than my previous school had been. So it took a bit of negotiating. And I remember picking up a book called The Red Badge of Courage, which was the classic American Civil War book, and putting it back, and picking up next to it, and I don't know what filing system they had, was a book called War Games Campaigns by Don Featherstone. And I opened this book, and I've still got it. Number one on my bookcase is that book, because that's my bookcases go round the room, including this one, which is full of shite. But number one is War Games Campaigns, which is always in that pride of position, because it was a revolutionary moment for me. My mind was blown.
Can I ask a cheeky question? Is that the copy you stole from the school library?
Yes, it is.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. I was so pleased with it, I nicked it. But but nobody else ever took it out. So in the end, I decided it was not so much theft as liberation. But yeah, it's the very copy, I'm afraid. Nobody's ever asked me that, so hopefully we won't get the police round later. But
I'm sure that the statute of limitations has passed on that one.
Probably. But yeah, I nicked that one, in the end. But not on that first occasion. But it was love at first sight. And of course, I was reading the second or third book in the sequence. I should have started with War Games, but that wasn't a book that I picked up. But I did. The school library was packed with books on wargaming, but they wasn't packed. But they had quite a few. So they had Tony Bath's book about wargaming campaigns. The WRG book, the absolute classic, which I didn't nick. I have actually got a copy, but I bought that, as I did with all the other ones. I found a copy of War Games on the local market. It was one of these sort of second-hand bookshops, and I picked it up for, I don't know, 10 bob or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I can't remember. But yeah, so I read that. I looked at that book and I was amazed by the photos, which if you look at them today, black and white with plasticine hills with all thumbprints in it where he'd put it together, it looks awful. But for me at the time, it was revolutionary. It was absolutely gobsmacking. And then I realized that people were actually playing proper games with this. So I attempted to do the same. So I bought the Airfix American Civil War kits, largely because the Confederates were in grey and the Union were in blue. So I didn't have to paint them. It's perfect. And I sorted them all out because I'd seen pictures where regiments, or everybody in that pose was in one regiment, and everybody in that pose was in another regiment, and it was so I put them all in these poses, cutting up bits of cornflake packet as the bases, and pushed them around the floor. I had a green carpet in my bedroom, which was fortuitous. It wasn't lime green; it was actually grass green, so it was absolutely brilliant. And that was the start of that. And my parents were horrified. They were horrified that I was still playing with toy soldiers when I was 11. My dad totally and utterly disapproved.
Why was that?
But I shouldn't have been there. My father was an engineer, and he thought I should have been playing with Meccano, building things, or I should have been. They'd buy me for Christmas. They'd buy me a chemistry set. I hated chemistry with a passion. I absolutely loathed it. I was when I was at school, physics, chemistry, biology, I absolutely loathed them, couldn't stand them. Whereas I loved English, history, I loved the arts, basically. That was what interested me. I could read books, Norse mythology and Greek mythology. I could read all sorts of stories that would transport you in your imagination to anywhere you wanted to be. You didn't get that with a chemistry set. All it did was make the room smell, and the experiments failed, and they were really boring experiments anyway. You couldn't blow anything up or anything. My dad told me that when he was a kid, he blew his mate's finger off with his chemistry set. You know, that was when chemistry sets were worth having. Well, mine didn't do that. You can blow anything up with it. It was bloody useless. I was stuck with that. But no, he absolutely, he was not happy about it. In fact, when I was 12, he took me to see a psychiatrist to have words with me about still playing with toy soldiers, because he thought that I was, you know, retarded in my development. I should have left toy soldiers behind. And I remember the psychiatrist saying to me, "How many times a week do you masturbate?" This is in front of my father. Anyway, on the way home, I said to my dad, I said, "Dad, I don't know about you worrying about me wargaming. I said, I'd be a bit more worried about that bloke asking questions like that." But it didn't really improve the situation. He absolutely hated it. Anyway, I think I must have been I was 13 because we moved abroad. We moved to Africa, actually. My dad got a job in Rhodesia, as was then. And so we moved there. And I remember sending off for a copy of some WRG set of rules and another one by Newbury. I think it was Newbury.
Newbury rules.
And these books arrived, and my God, it was like reading the periodic table. I might as well have been back in a science lesson. It was so convoluted. But I'd only bought them. I hadn't bought them to play the games. I'd bought them to prove to my dad how serious wargaming was, because in those days, wargaming was all about proving to people how serious it was. It was definitely not grown men playing with toy soldiers. It was you know, a very serious and sensible pastime where people with tweed jackets and leather patches on their elbows and pipes played it. So I took these books to him, and I said, it was a bit like, when did you last see your father? I remember knocking on his study door. In I went. I said, Father, these books have arrived from England. Because I've been waited months for the bloody things to get through. And anyway, he said, leave them with me. Anyway, an hour went by. And I was like, I don't know, I hadn't thought about it at the time, but I was like the expectant father, you know, in the waiting room, in the delivery suite. Anyway, he came out and I said to him, what do you think? What do you think? I said, they're very serious, aren't they? He said, they're bloody turgid. And that was all he would say on the subject. And I think the fact they were so turgid was even worse than being childish. Anyway, it was an ongoing battle of wits between my parents and I, and they would buy me totally presents that I was not interested in at all at Christmas to try and get me building the fourth suspension bridge in Meccano or whatever. And I was never going to do that. But I could build Bailey bridges out of it, which they hadn't thought. Anyway, I decided I've got a plan here, because I was still playing games on the floor. So I went in and I said to them, I have got a new hobby. And they said, oh, what's that? I said, table tennis. So pleased were they that they immediately bought me a table tennis table. And I had some pals around from school that weekend knocking the ball about. I hate table tennis. It's boring. And it was slightly ridiculous because we had a tennis court. So why play table tennis when you've got a tennis court? But never mind. So we played table tennis. And after that, it never got used for table tennis again, but it was a ready-made war games table. And I think at that point, my father realised that I'd outfoxed him, and he gave up. And he gave up complaining. Although he was never impressed with it. And when it became a full-time career, I remember phoning him up and telling him, and he was horrified. He was, because he'd spent his life as a civil servant, and he believed men should do men's things and bloody sensible things they should be. So he really was horrified, and he never lived to see Too Fat Lardies really be successful. Well, bollocks, tough luck. That's his fault, isn't it? So,
obviously, you've gone through this journey as a kid, and you got to play by yourself, and you moved around, and you had your mates play and have a table tennis. But how did you actually get around playing the games, or was it a lot of playing by yourself, etc.?
Yeah, it was all solo. There's no way I was going to go to school. I was big rugby player, and I was 6'5" at 13, so I was straight into the second row, and I loved rugby, and I played a lot of rugby, and I was a bit of a lad, if you know what I mean. And there's no way I was going to tell all my rugby playing mates that I went home and painted little dollies. So it was very much a solo affair, until in 1980 we came back to the UK, and we were homeless, actually, had nowhere to live. It was all a bit political when Mugabe took over in Rhodesia in Zimbabwe, and my uncle was a cabinet minister in Ian Smith's government, and my father was in military intelligence in the Rhodesian security forces. And my uncle said to my dad, "You better get out, mate." So the day before Independence Day, we got in the car. My dad phoned me up and said, "Meet us outside," and we got in the car and drove south across the border into South Africa, and we flew back to the UK. And my parents had a house there, but they got it let out, long-term let, so it took a bit of arranging. So they immediately sent me on a month's outward bound course in Scotland, which was fabulous. It was great for me, canoeing in the North Sea and climbing mountains and doing all that. And by the time I came back, they borrowed a house for a friend. Anyway, very rapidly after that, I had to get a job, because I had to get a job. I had no opportunity to go into it, further education or whatever. And I wasn't really cut out for it, really, because I'm a bit thick. So I came home from work, and they said, we're moving up to Cheshire, which is where my mother's from, just outside Manchester, whereas I live just outside London, and we were living just outside London then. And I said, "Oh, when are we going?" They said, "Not we." They said, "You're not coming. You've got to get a mortgage." So I was 18. So my grandmother had just died. And so my dad went, "Here's 10 grand, go and get a mortgage." My salary at the time was £2,500 a year. So I managed to just get a property for 17,500, which was 3 times my salary, plus this 10 grand. So I had a mortgage at 18. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, actually, because property in St Albans went through the roof after that. So that actually gave me, all the equity I could ever really want. Which was great. It did mean that there was I, a single fella on his own, without friends, without whatever, really. But so there was an advert back of Military Modelling saying new wargaming club opening up, because this was that bleak period where Battle for Wargamers had shut and miniature wargaming hadn't started. So if you wanted a wargames fix, you had to go for Military Modelling in the UK. It was the only show in town, and it was kind of better than nothing. Anyway, so it said we're meeting. So I went to this guy's house. He was an American. He was completely mad, but he lived here. And about a dozen of us turned up. And after about 2 weeks, his wife said to him, "These people can't come traipsing through our house every week. You better find somewhere else." So that's when we found the community centre where we are, and we've been there ever since. So no, actually, we went to a pub in between. We went to this awful pub. It was terrible, but there we are. It served a purpose at the time. So I started wargaming then with those guys, and they were an interesting bunch of guys, because there was a fella who was sort of the leading light, a bloke called Will McNally, who now lives, funnily enough, up near Manchester, near where my parents lived. And he'd been quite known for writing his own rules. And there's still a few copies on the internet knocking about of stuff he did years and years ago. And I just thought, well, this is what happens. People come along and they write their own rules, design their own games, and then we play them on the tabletop. So that's what we did. We wrote our own rules and played them every week. And we never played. I've never played a single Games Workshop game ever. I've never played any of the really big popular games. I've just played what we did at the club. I did play DB, one of those ones. DB, not the little one. DB something. DBR. But yeah, but it was the guy who used to put it on was the American guy, and every game he'd have them all on their little bases, and he'd put his toolbox on the table over there, and he'd go to it, and he'd bring one base over, and he'd put it on the table, and he'd go back, and he'd put it on the table. And then we had to finish the game early so we could reverse the process. But he would never have any terrain, and he'd say, "This is just a play test every week. This is just a play test." And all that happened was the 2 lines advanced, and then your choice was, do we start at that end or do we start at that end? So I don't think I ever really saw that game in its best. So we didn't really play that very much. So, but we did play a game called Body Count for the Vietnam War, which we loved. We thought it was brilliant. And we played that a lot. And my colleague Nick was very keen on it. I never really talked to Nick because he was like 5 years younger than me. We had a rule that nobody could come to the club under 18 because this American guy was a teacher and he hated children with a passion. He absolutely loathed them. So nobody in 18 could come in. But somehow Nick snuck in when he was 16. And I think I was about 21 at the time. So obviously I was still playing rugby and beer and women and all that were my main priority. And I wasn't going to hang around with a 16-year-old. But some years later, after Nick had finished university, we were at the club and somebody said, "What should we do next week?" And he said, "Why don't we get Body Count out and give it a go?" Oh, yeah, all right, why not? We used to have really good fun playing that. And so Nick said he'd run it. So we came to the club. And he set out this table, and our terrain at the club was awful. I mean, it looked like we'd stolen it off the gypsies. I mean, it was just absolutely terrible. It was awful condition. But he used to get it out, and he's one of these artistic people who can set up a table and dress it, even using any old rubbish, and make it look really good. And he had this elevated railway section going over a valley, and in the valley below, he had the raised roads with the paddy fields around it. It was breathtaking, to be honest with you, considering it was made with all this random rubbish in the company. And so we got the rules out and we started playing. And after 15 minutes, we said, "These are turgid," going back to my father's favourite word. So, and they were bloody awful, terrible. How we'd ever enjoyed them, maybe we were playing them wrong. But so we said, it actually turned into a bit of a workshop session. What would we do if we were going to write a set of rules? And so we came out with the ideas of leadership, how big men are important. Nick is a huge John Wayne fan. So the big man ethos, it was first and foremost in his mind. I'm a big Kriegspiel fan. So I said, I'd like to take the fire tables out of Kriegspiel. So you just go, is it a great shot? Is it an okay shot? Or is it a poor shot? And you get rid of all those tables of +1, -1, +2, this, that, and the other. And then he said, we want card activation. And I said, that is bollocks. That will never work. That will be terrible. That will be absolutely awful. Anyway, he said, trust me, we'll give it a go. So this must have been about 2000, we think. It might have been 1999. Don't know. But email had just really started. So we ping-ponged some ideas about during the week. And by the following Tuesday night, club night, we had a set of rules called DMZ, which went on to become Charlie Don't Surf, but it took another 10 years because we played the game. We thought, yeah, we quite like this. And we had the idea of shock that we use in a lot of our rules now, but at the time we called it wounds. And the idea was that the causeman, the medic, becomes very important in a Vietnam game. You see that a lot in the films and all that. So some of the ideas were there in, excuse me, very rough prototype fashion. And, but we ran it out. And after a few weeks, I said, hey, this would do for World War II. Well, I had a mate called Egg. He's a great bloke. He was bald as a coot. He had a little round head like an egg, completely bald. But he was also, by coincidence, an egg farmer. He had a farm with chickens. Anyway, his father died and left him the farm, and he immediately sold it for very large quantities of money and buggered off around the world on a yacht for 6 years, drinking all his money away, which I have to say I admire him hugely for. But I admired him even more because he said to me, would you look after my World War II collection, please? So I took it out of storage, and it was really, I'd never seen, it was 15 mil World War II. I had never seen 15mm World War II before. I'd only ever seen sort of 20mm Airfix. This was right at the front end of Battlefront starting to produce figures. I don't know if they produced Flames of War as a rule set. I think they were still just a figure manufacturer at that time. So these figures actually weren't that, mate. They were mainly Skytrek's Command Decision range. And they were beautiful. He'd done an amazing job with them. He was a really good painter. I think he had an airbrush, which in those days was something, you know, you only ever saw with like professional model makers in military modeling. But we used these figures and developed Iron Man Shotman, which we had no intention of publishing. But I used to write a lot for War Games Illustrated magazine in the 90s. If any of you have got the War Games Illustrated vault, if you go and do a search on my name, you'll find loads and loads of very pretentious articles. I remember writing a series called Back to Basics, where I told people all about the fundamentals of warfare. I hadn't got a bloody clue. I was making up as I went along. But it was, nevertheless, I quite enjoyed writing it. Old Duncan McFarlane, who founded Miniature War Games and then founded War Games Illustrated, gave me my first break, if you like, in terms of publishing the first articles I did. And I wrote quite a few articles on either, some of them were quite big series on like the War of 1866 in Germany. I wrote a series on the Maximilian War in Mexico, but I also wrote some one-off ones on game design and that type of thing. And I wrote one called I Love the Smell of Kriegspiel in the Morning, which is the first reference we can find, because we're not sure when Too Fat Lardies began, because we didn't make a note of it because it didn't seem very important at the time, because it was only ever going to be a hobby. And when we published I Ain't Been Shot Mum, somebody said, you've got to have a name. So we went down the pub and we couldn't think of a name. Anyway, after about 6 or 7 pints, Nick said, what about Too Fat Lardies? Because the TV program with the two women chefs, Too Fat Ladies, were very popular at the time. And we went, ha, 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 that's hilarious. Well, anything would have been hilarious after 7 or 8 pints. And I got the napkin and I drew the Pie in the Pint, that Pie in the Pint logo on the napkin. And we went, because he's fat because he eats too many pies, and I'm fat, or was then, because I drank too much beer. So the Pie in the Pint became the obvious sort of logo. So anyway, I wrote an article and I said, if anybody's interested in a copy of these rules that we're knocking together, just drop me an email. And people did, and I'd send them to them just for free. And then several people said, you've got to publish these. And I said, no, I haven't. No, I don't want to do that. I've got a real job. You know, I was running a business, and I thought I really haven't got time for this. So I thought, but what I'll do is I'll make them available. So I was selling them for £3.50 a time. And my wife ran the local brownie pack, and she had this wire binding machine. You put the bits of paper in, you go crunch, and then you put a wire binding thing. So I used that, put an acetate sheet on the front, and I charged them. I printed it out on an old bubble jet, and I charged them £3.50 for a copy. Anyway, it was only after about 6 months that I realised it was costing me £5 in ink to print them out. And that didn't include the cost of the acetate sheet. So I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. And it was getting to the point where lots of people were buying them off me. So I went to a local printer, told him what we did, and he laughed at me. But nevertheless, I said, listen, mate, there's no good laughing at me. Do you want to print the bloody things or not? He went, oh, I'll print them, yeah. But at the time, they printed them as loose sheets. And I put it together with this stupid bloody binding machine. And that went on for about 6 months, and it just got to the point where it was tiresome. So I actually went out and got, I think it was 300 copies printed properly. And at the time, Origins Awards in the United States sent me a message saying, I Ain't Been Shot Mum has been recommended for an Origins Award. And I thought, not really bothered about that. But he said, we'd like 7 copies so we can give them to the judges. So I thought, well, I've only got 80 left. I thought, I'm not giving them 7 copies. So I very rudely said to him, why don't you give your award to somebody who gives a fuck? and they've never invited me back since. And so I kind of missed a marketing opportunity there, but nevertheless, it didn't entirely impede our progress. So we published that, and then we published a few sets of rules that we'd had knocking about, which we sort of Kiss Me Hardy, the Napoleonic game, and If the Lord Spares Us, which was based on the war in the First World War in Palestine, which is a bit eclectic now. It's sad, really, because we really enjoyed playing that. Nick's great uncle was killed in the Gaza Strip, funnily enough, topically. I think it was the Battle of Beersheba or something like that. I can't remember exactly.
You should have
so
told that more in Australia for all the light horse people. And
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
My great grandfather was there.
Really, yeah. And what a fabulous story that is, and the great film. There's a really good film about it as well, isn't there? A really brilliant film. Yeah, so it was one of those periods that you could do when rules were in black and white, and they were cheap to produce. The thing about black and white rules was that if you got 100 copies printed or 1,000 copies printed, it was still the same unit price. So you could do a short run. You could go out there and get 200, 300 copies printed. Whereas in colour, the cost is astronomical per unit. It's the setup cost that is the big investment. And that means that when you go to full colour, which I resisted for years and years, when you go to full colour, you're buggered. You can kiss goodbye the little eclectic, interesting periods that you really want to do, and you've got to stick with the big periods, World War II, Black Powder, Napoleonics, that type of thing, which is a shame in a way because it does restrict what we can get around to publishing. But that's another issue. But yeah, so that's how we started publishing. Anyway, it got to the point after about, I didn't note this down because it didn't seem important at the time, but it might have been 3 or 4 years where I was trying to run a business, proper business, and all this bloody Too Fat Lardies stuff was getting in the way. I used to get in the office for 5:30 in the morning and get all the Too Fat Lardies stuff done by 9 o'clock. Well, it got to the point where it was midday before I was moving on to my real work, and I'd already done like 7 hours, whatever it was. And I said to my wife, I'm going to have to chuck this Too Fat Lardies stuff in. I said, it's just, I can't run a business and do this. And she said, well, hold on, what do you want to do? And I thought, what do I want to do? Do I want to work in industry, or do I want to work in wargaming? That's a bit of a ridiculous question, isn't it, really? But she said, look, our younger daughter had just gone up to big school, so to senior school. So the 2 girls were at the same school. And that meant my wife was just doing 1 school run, a couple of miles up the road, rather than trying to do 2 school runs and this, that, and the other. And she said, well, if you walk the dog in the morning, I'll do the school run, because I could walk the dog as early as I wanted, because we live in a village right on a heathland. Yeah. So I walk out the door and I'm there on the heath, and away we go. And she said, why don't you take the chance and make Too Fat Lardies a full-time business? So, it was a bit more complicated than that. So I sold the business and I paid off the mortgage, which is big help. And I thought, right, I'll give this a go. But it wasn't self-supporting. It wasn't self-funding, really. But, she went back to work as well. That was because she was keen to go back to work, because the girls in one place meant she could do that. So she went to work for a company on the farm at the end of the road. It's a forklift truck business where she does the accounts and all that. And she loves it. She really enjoys it. She does 3 days a week. So there was some income coming in from that. And I actually started painting figures and selling them on eBay. And it was at the time, this was entirely accidental, it was at the time when Flames of War was really at its peak. And I would paint a whole company and all supports every week. And it was in June. Yeah, it was exhausting. It was in June. So I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning as soon as the sun was up, and I'd start painting, and I'd paint until lunchtime. And then I'd do the Too Fat Lardies stuff after lunch. So all that complaining about I can't run two businesses, I ended up running two businesses and working even longer hours and buggering up my eyesight. That's why I wear spectacles now. But anyway, we then published a set of rules called Sharp Practice in its first edition, and it sold like hotcakes. It absolutely, I have never published a set of rules that sold as many copies as Sharp Practice first edition. It was just because there were no rules out there at the time for skirmish games in that period, and it just sold like mad. And I actually went on the beer for 2 years. I didn't have to do any work. It was fabulous. It was really first class. So lots of time for having a few beers and getting inspiration for the next project. So it was that kind of set the business up, if you like. And from then on, it's just been a sort of gradual procession of publishing one set of rules and publishing another set of rules. And very fortunately, some of them have been, very popular, things like Chain of Command. And it got to a point where I thought, I really feel that games designers are not being encouraged because they're not really being rewarded for what they do. So at the time, if you wrote a set of rules for some publishers, you would be lucky to get a couple of £1,000. There you go, off you go. That's it, and you lose all your copyright and royalties and so on and so forth. I'll give you an example. When we set up Reisswitz Press, Dave Brown came on board. Dave Brown was already very well known with things like General de Brigade. And he said to me after his first month's royalties, he said, I've had more in royalties from you in this first month than I've ever had from Caliber ever. So, and I thought, well, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to reward game designers and encourage other game designers to come through. So James Morris, we've just published, James published a couple of things with Games Workshop, but we've just allowed him to publish his first set of rules, and we've allowed him a lot of leeway in terms of who he used for artwork and commissioning all that work, which I don't think he would have got done anywhere else. Strength and Honor by Mark Backhouse. I'm absolutely convinced that that is a brilliant game system, but I don't think he'd have got it published by anybody else because it's a bit quirky, it's a bit niche. So it's gone from being just a games designer to being a game publisher. That creates some balance issues for me, some work balance issues, because I'm spending more time editing and publishing other people's work than I am spending designing my own games, and that's the wrong balance for me. But and if I can get that right, which involves saying no to people, which is something I'm not very good at, because I generally try and be accommodating and nice, although my wife might not necessarily claim that, but fortunately she's out with the dog, so she can't call me a liar.
She can't overhear that one.
Yeah. So I just need to learn to say no a bit more to people. So, but that's kind of how I got to where I am today. It's an unusual journey. I think we all have unusual journeys in our own way, don't we? Nobody's journey is the same as anybody else's.
I think it's actually hearing people tell their story and the journey that's been on actually helps us understand the similarities in our own journeys and some of the quirky nature of what we've done and the parallels that actually bind us together as a gaming community. I'd like to go back to your comments of turgid.
Yeah.
Because actually it's a great word, and I think the way that your father used it and you've used it in regards to design, a games design, is it's a great starting point, because there's been plenty of rules out there which are turgid, and we've talked to other people about how their approaches, and the question we ask them is, in your mind, what makes a good game? Right. And what are the principles that you put in place when you're designing the game to try and meet that outcome that you want for people who play it?
All right. I'm going to wind back a little bit.
Yep, go for it.
When I was 16, I joined the army as a junior soldier, and I was intrigued and amazed to discover there was something called tactics. I thought you just lined up and went bang, bang, bang. like in the war films. And I was absolutely blown away with the tactical detail of drills and things like that. You know, there's a proper way to get out of a helicopter. You know, who knew? I didn't. You know, you've got to, and there's the right chair for you to be sitting in that helicopter. And all those drills I found intriguing. So for me, that began an interest in how infantry tactics have developed, small unit infantry tactics have developed. And that informed my wargaming journey in terms of the periods that I've gained. So my real interest began around 1866 or 1848, if you like. It's the point where the Prussians introduced the needle gun. So they have a breech loading weapon rather than a muzzle loading weapon. And that changes the way infantry can fight. And I then got involved in researching how infantry tactics developed. I was very interested in looking at the Great War. You know, you see all these films and you listen to all the people that tell you that the Great War was a great big sausage machine where these entitled upper class generals shoved, especially if you believe Gallipoli stories, but we might want to avoid that one. Where these upper class British generals shoved poor soldiers into the sausage machine and got them killed by doing the same stupid thing repeatedly again and again and again. Well, it's bollocks. It's just simply not true. It's absolute rubbish. The British Army and the Australian Army and all the other Dominion and armies and Empire armies went through a huge period of development during the First World War. We go from a stage where in 1914 artillery is firing almost in a Napoleonic mode, firing directly at their target. We get to the point at 1918 where we've got range finding devices using sound equipment. We're firing counter battery fire. We're firing a mixed barrage of smoke and artillery, and the fire plans are developed to be extraordinarily sophisticated. And they didn't go from A to Z overnight. That's a huge period of development. I was at the Australian War Memorial a couple of years ago, and the guide showing me around was telling the group I was with how the British were playing polo on the beach at Gallipoli. And I had to walk away from that conversation because I thought, I appreciate national myths are important, and I actually do support the concept of national myths. I think it's important that we all feel that we're on the same team and we understand what that team's about. But I don't think you can go around telling lies, and that really annoyed me. But we get exactly the same thing here with things like Blackadder on television being seen as a historical fact. So going through that development process of understanding infantry tactics, that's what I found interesting, and I wanted to include that in my games. But what I did when, and I Ain't Been Shot Mum, to be honest with you, was designed to be a simulation with the view of it being really appealing to military people and maybe academics, using it as a modern version of a Kriegspiel, if you like. I don't think any of them even noticed it, to be frank, but there we are. But that was my objective. But it sold pretty well. People were interested. There was quite a lot of pushback at some of the ideas that we were introducing, particularly friction in wargaming, which at the time was something that seemed to be a new concept to many people. But so I decided when I wrote Chain of Command, what I want to do is to create a simulation, but do it using game mechanics. The mechanism, not mechanics, that's the wrong word. They fix cars. Game mechanisms. So if you, and that's obviously, well, I don't know, maybe it isn't obvious, but it has been a successful rule set to date. And, you know, I've got a lot of people looking forward to the second edition of that, which will be coming out in April, actually, next year. Conveniently in the next tax year. Our tax year is slightly different to yours. Ours begins on the 1st of April. So I'm going to get all my expenses out in this tax year and release the book in the next tax year. Yeah. But there we are, the intimate secrets of publishers. Yeah, so it's I think the important thing is that you've got to take people on the journey with you. There's no point in presenting them with mechanisms that are going to annoy them and frustrate them. You've got to present them with a game that is enjoyable to play at every stage in the process. When I'm rolling to hit, is that enjoyable? When I'm rolling for effect, is that enjoyable? There can't be any clunky bits in there that annoy people and make them go, actually, I don't really want to play this game because I don't like how the mechanisms are going. And the other thing that does is it's like driving a car down a bumpy road. Every time you come into contact with the rules is like going down a bump, and that jars you back into reality. One of the things that I feel that's really important in terms of a war game is the ability to suspend your disbelief, the opportunity to get immersed in the game and enjoy the experience you're having. And every time you have to go back to the rules, that lifts you out of that experience and puts you back in the next pothole where the car crashes down into it. And I think for that reason, I've always felt that it's advantageous if you can make the rules as memorable as possible. So when you roll to hit, it's always a 4 or whatever. Or when you roll for effect, it's always a 6. It's always a kill. And if you can keep things simple to the point of simplistic in some of the mechanisms, then you've got a lot more chance of people remembering it and just playing through the game without ever having to refer to the book. And there were some aspects in Chain of Command 1 where that didn't happen. And that's one of the reasons we've gone back to it and looked at producing Chain of Command 2. But it's that ability to immerse people in the story and the narrative of what's happening and just have them enjoying the game rather than having to go back to the rules, I think is the design, a goal that I aspire to. Whether I achieve it or not is another issue.
And what aspect of the games that you play do you get the most enjoyment out of?
Well, my life generally is spent playing games that haven't yet been released. And when a game set is released, I actually often don't play that game very much again because it's a business and it's a funnel. You have to have stuff coming through the pipeline at the back as it comes out the end. So often I spend time playing games that aren't yet fully formed. The thing that I most enjoy in that process is the workshop games that we play at the very, very front end. And the way I try and approach a new game design is to get the armies ready and to have a goal in mind of what I want to achieve, but not to actually have written any rules at all. I just take a big notebook and we get the figures and we go, right, how does the game begin? And we literally sit around and going, well, do we deploy them on the table and then advance forward in the DBA, DBM, DB, whatever, the way you have always historically played? You line your army up and deploy your army and then the game begins. Whereas something like Chain of Command, that doesn't happen. You have a patrol phase where you go through and then that determines the points to which you can deploy. And that came out of one of these workshop type sessions. So I really enjoy the front end design bit because that's when you have literally got a blank piece of paper and just an idea of where you want to go to. And you try in that first session to have got to a point where you've actually got something that's sort of playable, where you're actually playing a game. And I love that sort of working in that hot house environment where we're all throwing ideas about, bouncing ideas around. And it's not a democratic process. It's a bit like I took part in a process to design a war game for the British Army, which was led by an academic. And he was joined by a retired Major General, and we had a guy from the technical side of warfare, and we had me as a war games designer, and we had a couple of other people putting their oars in. And it's like asking a committee to design a racehorse, and you get a camel, is the old story. And it was not an enjoyable process, and I would never want to take part in that again, to be frank. And they're terrible payers, but there we are. But that's the
What was it like as a game of simulation?
was fucking awful, to be blunt. It was absolutely terrible. It was bloody awful. And I don't believe it ever really got played. It was neither fish nor fowl. So it's not a democratic process. So when people chuck ideas around, and there's maybe a dozen of us in the room, and everybody's jumping up and down and shouting their own corner, it's my job to pick the ideas out of the air that sound quite good and put them in my basket and then try and make sense out of it. So it's quite fun. It's quite a fun thing to do, and I really enjoy that bit. But having said that, I rarely get to go back and play games. The one thing that breaks the mold there is Chain of Command. I do get to go back and play Chain of Command a lot, and that's really unusual. So that might be indicative of something. Or it might just be that I really enjoy Chain of Command. But I keep going back to that, but it's probably because it's the small unit tactics that I'm most comfortable with and that I most enjoy replicating on the tabletop. And also, World War II was kind of the wallpaper to my life growing up. You know, my dad had been in the war, my uncles had been in the war. One of my uncles was on the Burma Railway. He was a Chindit who was taken prisoner, and you grew up with those people around you. And World War II was just a constant. Nobody was going, "Oh, I bagged the Hun on that day and shot down 2 Messerschmitts." But there was just constant references to rationing and this, that, and the other.
It was still very new. Well, it was history for a lot of those people, which we don't realise now because we're
that's right. No, I mean it was
we're older than they were. Talking
about. When I was a kid, World War II was closer than the Falklands is now. Much closer than the Falklands is now. The Falklands was 40 years ago. World War II was only like 18 years before I was born. So, and you know, my dad was a relatively young guy. You know, he was still flying combat missions in 1980 in a sort of reserve air capacity.
Like Australia in the Vietnam War. That's further off.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
Yeah.
So one of the things, talking to the designers and being the customer of games at the moment, I think we live in a wonderful age for wargaming because with Kickstarters, independent publishing, we could talk about Games Workshop and never playing their games, but how they have spawned lots of people in the industry. It's a great time to be a gamer, and our club is fantastic in that it's very eclectic. So we could look at right here at the moment, if we pick World War II, we've got people who play Chain of Command, and we've been showcasing a bit of bolt action, people playing it in different periods. We've had people delve into 0200 hours because we want to do more. I'm taking off and showcasing Five for Victory from the Studio Tomahawk guys. Why? Because all those games use the same figures, but they play differently. So they've got something that's different for other people. So sometimes you're in the mood for one versus the other.
I think
that's a good something point about your games or the way that you approach games that is a particular Lardies feel or a way that you want to be seen as a designer or gamer?
I don't know. I think before I'm a game designer, I like to think I'm a historian, although I've got no technical qualifications in that. I just never had the opportunity to go to university or anything like that. But I do. For me, wargaming is an opportunity to explore and understand history a bit better. And I hope that when I create games, it allows people to get some kind of feel for a period. And I'm not saying that's unique in any way, shape or form. I'm sure other people have exactly the same aspirations. All I'm saying is that what I try and do is create games that have history at their core, which is probably a bit of a stupid answer because probably everybody maybe feels that to some degree or another. But
no, I think that's not a bad answer, because let me ask this. Would Sharp's practice have been called Sharp's practice and been skirmish oriented if there hadn't been the Sharp's novels and the television series around at that
well, it's called sharp practice because not sharps. Sharp practice is a legal term for slightly dubious behaviour, and obviously using the name sharp is slightly dubious behaviour. So sharp practice is a pun on several levels. But no, it wouldn't have been called that. What happened there was we were coming back from crisis in Antwerp, and we were at the ferry port in Dunkirk. And there was a guy called Simon Bargery who founded Bolt Action Miniatures before they were bought by Warlord. Him and Paul Hicks ran Bolt Action Miniatures originally. And he came up to me and he said, have you considered writing a set of skirmish rules for the Napoleonic period, about 50 or 60 figures aside? I said, no, and I never will do either. Anyway, by the time we got off the ferry at the other side of the English Channel, we'd written the bloody things. And so I said to him, well, here's some rough ideas. What do you think? And we took that and play tested it a bit more and had a lot of good fun with a character called Richard Fondler, Dick Fondler, which we used to play test all the games, which was slightly unfortunate because unlike Richard Sharp, he turned out to be a complete poltroon. He was an abject failure at everything in military. It was almost as though Flashman had been created, but he didn't even do Flashman-esque things. He was just useless. But we played our way through all of the Sharp novels, including the earliest ones in India.
Yeah.
And that was great fun. I mean, it was great just to get to read those books and take my historian's head off for a bit and just immerse yourself in fiction. It's what I was saying about in the school library about why I love books, is your ability to escape and find yourself somewhere else in the hands of a good author is like having your own sort of Doctor Who's TARDIS. You know, you're transported somewhere else. I'm not entirely convinced Bernard Cornwell is the height of prose, but somebody like George MacDonald Fraser, on the other hand, you know, you read his books and you really, the Flashman books, and you really are transported to wherever he's taken you. But that was good fun. That was good fun to write and good fun to play. And we rushed it out a bit, to be honest with you. I never felt it was a completely finished product. And but it was hugely successful. And as I say, it provided the financial foundations of Too Fat Lardies. But the Sharp Practice 2 is a better game, but I'd probably write that differently again if I did it now. But I don't think I'd want to write it again because I every time I play Sharp Practice, I really enjoy it. There's a lot in there that I love when I go back to it that I've completely forgotten, which is good fun. I mean, they're playing in Sheffield. I'm wearing my steel larbed polo shirt because they're playing in Sheffield today. We've got a Lardy Games Day in Sheffield, and I know Sharp Practice will be popular there. And there's a Sharp Practice French Indian War event coming up next month in Bristol. So people are really, people are still enjoying it, however many years on. I don't know how old Sharp Practice 2 is. I haven't got a clue, and nor am I interested in finding out. So, but
we could just ask the two guys there; they'll probably tell us because I think they've been into it for a while.
Probably can't find it, but
I think it's 5, maybe 6 years old.
No, it's older than that.
Older than that, yeah.
It's 10 years. If it's a day, here we go. Hold on, we'll find out here.
It takes a while for it to get down here, you know.
Yeah, it's a long walk, isn't it? Do you know what? We ought to split the difference, really. It's 8 years.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Just coming up to 9, so no, it'll be 9 in April. So it'll go another next tax year product.
So one of the, gamers can get very hung up on the games, because that's what they play. Versus, oh, hang on, better turn the lights on here. It suddenly got dark. That just playing a game or getting out with the miniatures and having fun with people, and the evolution of rules and new additions can be really emotive for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you're saying, well, maybe there'll never be a Sharp Practice 3.
Yeah.
Is because you don't feel the need to continue an income stream for that, or actually you've got better things to do, or it would be a totally different game.
it's never about income streams.
Mm-hmm.
It's never about that. It's always about what I want to be playing. I've run businesses. I've done the corporate thing. I've worked in the city. I've worked with big names, assisting people to run businesses. And the thing I know that for me, I want this to still be my hobby, and I want to still have the passion about it. And I never say, oh, right, next year, let's have a board meeting. In Q3, we're going to be releasing this. And in Q4, we're going to be doing... None of that happens. Nothing. No planning at all. No marketing. You will never receive an email from me saying this is our product and what we're doing. I don't do it. I don't
I'm
play
going to hold
game.
you to that. We got a wonderful email, well, Facebook message and stuff the other day saying that you've appointed Mike and Lance as the distributors in Australia for Too Fat Lardies. Congratulations. Well done.
Yeah, I'm over the moon with that. I was speaking to them both at 6 o'clock this morning here. They messaged me at 2 o'clock in the morning the other day. They've arrived. They've arrived. Oh, thanks, lads. It's 2 o'clock in the bloody morning. But
I said, can I have a copy of Midgard? And they said, no, it hasn't arrived. We've got to wait for the pre-delivery.
Yeah, no, I'm packaging them up, 50 copies, and they're going this week. I'm just waiting for the reinforced packaging cases to come. But
I've got some mates in Queensland where I came from and play up in Toowoomba. They're playing it next week.
Yeah, well, it's arriving. It's arriving there. To be honest with you, we were kind of already vaguely talking to them, I think, but the cost of postage is horrific. I was utterly horrified when it was, and I put it up for like 21 quid or whatever, and some people were going, "Oh, you're ripping us off," but it was 20. It cost me more than 25 quid. I was subsidising it by sort of £5 a copy to try and make it viable. But it's I hadn't realised, but the cost of just posting a letter up the road has more than doubled in the last 4 years here, just for a first-class stamp. So that's a colossal increase when you're posting abroad, and it's not sustainable. So
that's
I'll
one of
tell you what,
the
international posting everywhere has gone up.
It's crazy, isn't it? I post stuff to my daughter occasionally, and my wife put together a little sort of goodie bag of some of her favourite stuff from the UK to send down to her. And she went to the post office and she said, "Oh, bollocks, she's not getting a parcel. It was just too expensive. So she'll have to wait till we come down in January to get her bits and pieces."
Well, I can remember trying to buy a set of rules out of England, and the postage was more expensive than the set of rules I was buying. It just wasn't worth buying them.
I can believe it. I bought a book in Australia, and on the Kokoda track, and had it shipped up to me here, and it was like 50 quid. It was astronomical. It's a big book. It's a heavy book, and it was a good. Is that Len?
Yeah.
Yeah, good day, Len. How are you, mate? You're all right.
Yeah, good. Yeah, probably listed as Yujung. That's my wife's name. I use her account.
Yeah, but it says you, not this time.
Yeah, no, that's my wife's name. I use her account. We only have one, and I don't do enough to warrant my own.
That's it, mate. Pocket money. You can just get pocket money.
So
good. So it was the right time. It was the right time to make that happen. And to be honest with you, it's the perfect fit, because they already produce tokens. And I've said to them, for example, we had our war bases in Scotland designed our Midgard tokens. So I've spoken to Martin at War Bases, and he's going to make that design available to the guys down in Melbourne, and they're going to be able to produce the official Too Fat Lardies token sets to go with the rules down there. So you'll be getting exactly the same product. It's just that yours will be manufactured down there.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about offshore, print on demand type arrangements. Like Lulu Books, which is one that's based in the United States. I bought Fistful of Towers. What I thought was coming out of Fistful of Toes. Sorry. It was coming out of. I thought it was being published out of and printed out of the US and being shipped to me, and I got it 3 days later, because it was actually printed in a print demand on demand facility in Port Melbourne. It came within days.
We looked at print on demand some years ago, and frankly, the quality was pretty atrocious, but that was the early days of print on demand, and it's really advanced in leaps and bounds. I've just had some stuff sent to me, which is, really top quality, and that is something that is an option we're looking at. But at the moment, we've certainly seen that shipping in bulk achieves tremendous savings. It's by no means free, but it achieves tremendous savings as opposed to sending them individually. So if we can achieve that, that's the first step, I think, towards getting stuff down to you guys. And we're actually talking to somebody in the United States about doing a similar thing there. So
it's like we had the conversation earlier in the year about getting Grande Armée 2 out. And by the time we looked at all the freight and everything else, it just we were still after quite a few copies, but obviously not enough to get through to that bulk area. So it's interesting.
Well, one of the things that I normally do for people, I mean, one club in Australia have asked me to do a pack of 8 copies of Midgard for them and tokens. And I think the postage on that came out at about 50 quid, no, 60 quid. So it's not cheap, but it's less than £10 as opposed to £25.
So I've got a group where we play Saga.
Yeah.
So I've got 12 books of Age of Chivalry with Martin and Co, etc. down at Evesham, and the dice, and it's like, But at the same time, we do love to support our local suppliers. So with Ian and Co at War and Peace, and it's a very tough position as a customer with online, be able to work out how to support the locals. Versus going direct. So it's a
problematic one, to be honest with you. Our sort of relationship with traders is, you want it to be available with traders because they get they've got a local presence and this, that, and the other. But we prefer it when people buy it from us because our financial return is significantly better when they buy it from us. Now that's fine if you live up the road, 20 miles up the road, and you're paying £4.50 UK postage. It doesn't really matter. But when it's 25 quid, it's ridiculous. And in that situation, it makes much more sense for us to work with partners in Australia and places like North America to actually do that distribution. And the other thing is that they're excellent representatives for us. They're ambassadors for our business. The guys there at Battlefield Accessories are 4 square blokes. They're nice guys, and that they're going to be a good ambassador for Too Fat Lardies and Reisswitz Press.
Most definitely. So one of the things about being from a gamer's side and from a club side, it's all about having a community. And we love playing games. And for our sins, we play lots of different games and things come in and out of fashion. But we do like to be able to get everyone involved, or a sizable proportion of our club involved in playing one game for a while, which builds a critical mass and a community and enjoyment. And then it'll have done its that and we move on to something else.
Yeah, exactly.
How does that work with you? What type of communities do you engage with around the world, or what would be ideal for you in Australia if we were able to do stuff?
Well, I mean, we've got a very busy community in the UK doing the Lardy Games Days. So there's probably a dozen in a year. So maybe slightly more now. And that takes me everywhere from Edinburgh to Exeter at the sort of two ends of the United Kingdom. And that's great because we're in a small country where you can get from where I live to Edinburgh in 7 hours if you don't worry about watching out for police cars, speed cameras. You can get to Exeter right down in Devon in 5 hours. It's very doable, which is basically me giving you, Exeter and Edinburgh are the equivalent of Perth and Brisbane for you guys. It's just not feasible. You're not gonna have the same distances, and that impacts in the United States as well. But we are starting to see Well, Lard America has been very successful at promoting our games around the conventions in America, which has similar geographical issues to you guys, but they've also been successful in running some Lardy Games Days, which tend to focus on clubs in certain areas. So I know some guys in Los Angeles just did La La Lard, and all these different names that come along, which are quite fun. So, and I think the Lard Down Under guys have done a great job in terms of getting us on the map at Australian conventions. I mean, you've got to admire old Pete Rossetti. I mean, he works tirelessly and without any thanks or help from me in the slightest.
We were chatting with him today, and so going into CanCon, and definitely, but we've already signed up for Victorious for next year, so we'll be looking to do that.
I've got some special green and gold lard dice that I'm bringing down to CanCon.
Excellent.
I've done
I'll have to get a set of those.
So
they're not baggy, unfortunately. But
is it going to be the pie or the pint that's a 6?
It's no, the pie and the pint are both on the 6, so the same as one of them.
Yep.
But it's going to be
the wrong colour.
green and gold, which I probably shouldn't do after having watched the Wallabies.
By the way, it was actually enjoyable watching the Wallabies on the weekend for the first time in many a year. I
loved it. It was a great game. I had a really, really good time. I really enjoyed it.
Just to let you know, I played rugby. I only retired from playing rugby a couple of years ago.
Right.
I didn't realise that a couple of good mates of mine were gamers as well. So now we play games all the time together.
Well, that's it. Rugby players never tell people about their little toy soldiers. That's
I played rugby when I was younger with a guy called Nick Hoskins.
Yeah.
And his son, Ollie, was playing D&D in London.
Right.
One day I got a phone call. I said, I'm playing D&D. Yeah, actually, we want you to come and run out at Twickenham and play the Wallabies. We don't have enough props. And so he got his one only cat from a phone call. He was playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, I took my boots with me on Saturday. I was hoping they might be short, but no. I think they should be gone.
Well, look, you're coming down in for CanCon, obviously, to see your daughter and family out here, and then going down to Canberra, which make sure you bring something to deal with the heat, because CanCon does get rather hot.
Yeah, I'm all right with heat. I do heat. I'm good with heat. So I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to be a brilliant trip.
Have you been to CanCon before?
Yeah, came 2 years ago. Not last year, which sounds like it was the last CanCon, but it wasn't. Last January, 2023. It wasn't that hot, actually. It was good. And I had the best pie I've ever had in my life out one of those hot cabinets. I couldn't believe the quality of the meat pie. Brilliant. Really good. So I'm hoping they still have those, not the same batch, hopefully, but I'm hoping they still have the pies there.
4 and 20s. So
I hate to say it, Richard, but my experience with the pies in those places can be a bit hit and miss.
Comparing them to British pies, and so therefore, low standard. Don't go to New Zealand. They all think of their pies are better than ours, maybe.
Yeah, my daughter's just been over there, actually. Her and her flatmate went out to Queenstown and had a really good time. But I've got most of my family are Kiwis, actually. I've got far more family in New Zealand than I have in the UK, but I've never been. I keep trying to get over there.
Okay. Well, look, hopefully there'll be the opportunity for you to come down to Melbourne, preferably in August when we're running Victorious. If not, we can arrange a day to come out, and love to have you at the club.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to go to Melbourne. It's kind of the reverse side of the coin to Sydney, isn't it?
Very much so.
Very much, yeah.
It is, yeah. So it's the Dame Edna Everage compared to Sir Les Patterson, isn't it? That was he chose those cities as their homes very carefully, I'm told. But,
Barry Humphries is a Melbourneite.
Yeah,
and has a very hate-hate relationship, or had a very hate-hate relationship with Sydney. So.
Well, my wife from Sydney and is quite happy to never live there again. So.
And yet my daughter absolutely loves it. She's on Bondi, so she's living the dream. She really is.
Nice. She should move to St Kilda in Melbourne.
Yeah.
No surf.
I gotta admit, I hit up in Cairns for a reason.
We had a guy turn up at the club last night. He'd reached out. He was interested in playing BattleTech, and we've got a good little BattleTech community at the club. And he said, just turn up. You'll have a game. There's no problem with the law lineup. He says, yeah, I've just moved down from Sydney. And he'd said, yeah, I'd looked at this. And it's like, so I just bought a house down here because it was considerably cheaper to buy a house in Melbourne than it is in Sydney. But
it's crazy. So
I know what I'm paying for my Airbnb when I'm in Sydney. I thought I'd bought the bloody thing.
Yeah. That's good. Well, look, we've taken 90 minutes of your time on a
without
Saturday.
caffeine. Without caffeine.
Yeah,
Without caffeine.
it's kicking in.
Well, I don't think you needed caffeine because you've been on such a buzz. So maybe
it's always a pleasure to chat to people. I always enjoy it. I think one of the great things about our hobby is that how multifarious it is. There's so many different aspects of the hobby that we can talk about, you know, painting and figures and terrain building and history and game design even. I hope I haven't bored you too much. But so it's always fun to talk because conversations always tend to end up going to different places, and it's great. I always enjoy talking to you guys down there as well because you're civilized.
Maybe. But look, it's been great listening to you, getting your anecdotes. There's things that you've said today that it's just I'm going to pull out and keep in the back of my mind for when I'm interacting with the non-wargaming public tomorrow, because there's so many truisms that you put those things in front of people and suddenly they go, actually, I want to be involved. I understand it, and you know, we just want to go.
Well, platitudes are my speciality, so feel free to help yourself.
No, I hope to see you down in CanCon, Richard. I'll be down there.
Looking forward to seeing you, mate. It'll be great to see you. And I've said to Peter, I want to run games this time because I felt like I cheated a bit last time when I was down, just sort of flouncing about like God knows what. So I'm running games Saturday and Sunday, all day Saturday and Sunday morning. So, but it'll be good to see you, mate. It'll be good. You can buy me a beer.
We've got a night game and a desert game that are well on track. Jerry's been giving us a good hand getting them ready.
Brilliant.
Yeah, using chain of command.
Yeah. I really look forward to seeing that. I'll be interested to see what you're doing with night stuff because that's something I want to get involved in. I've had some ideas, so we'll compare notes, mate. Yeah, well, as I said, the rules we're going to be using, the play testings evolved them a fair bit. So hopefully it seems to be working. We're tweaking it as we go. Well, that's it. Play testing gives you all the answers. You put it on the table. Whatever you think might happen, you find out when you put it on the table, don't you? Exactly. Until that point, it's a great theory. And then you discover it's a lot of bollocks. Yep. And exactly. Have to start again. And you realise all the things you have to fix. Yep. Yeah. Yep.
And the more people who play, the more people who tell you stuff. So
that's a fact. That is a fact.
We're going to have another crack at it tomorrow, see how it goes.
Good work.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, I think we should let Rich go on and then enjoy the weekend.
Yeah.
Go and get that coffee. And thank you very much.
Laminate floor to love.
Thank you very much. Joy.
Yeah, thanks, it's just going to be the best day of my life. It really is. Right. See you, lads. Nice to see you. Cheers. Right. Thank you very much indeed for inviting. Been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for coming on board.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.